People have died and more are trapped after an avalanche in eastern Turkey, where dozens of people were working after an earlier avalanche on Tuesday. Some people have become trapped in vehicles at the site, where about 300 rescue personnel were working. It's reported police officers, security guards, firefighters and civilians are among the dead. At least 5 people died in Tuesday's avalanche. US President Donald Trump's delivered a State of the Union address that was marked by moments of controversy. He used the annual speech to say there's been a great American comeback, but he refused to shake the hand of Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and she ripped up a copy of his speech behind him. US correspondent Simon Marks says the president was in ebullient form.
This was Donald Trump absolutely laying out his stall for re-election in November of 2020. And if you want to know why Donald Trump feels so confident about the re-election battle that he's about to engage in, you just had to listen to the cadences that he struck in that speech, particularly one right at the beginning. Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again. I mean, that was the tone of the entire speech, whether he was talking about foreign policy, winning, as he put it, the trade war with China. When Donald Trump walked into the chamber, there were absolutely no pleasantries whatsoever exchanged between him and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the woman, of course, who had led the impeachment inquiry and investigation against President Donald Trump.
The death toll in the coronavirus outbreak is now up to at least 490. China is stepping up its attempts to control its spread, with as many as 18 million people in parts of the country where they're being told to stay at home. Russia has set up a quarantine center near the Siberian town of Tyumen for at-risk evacuees arriving from China. Moscow's airlifted some 150 citizens by military planes from Wuhan region. Daria Bondarchuk reports from Moscow.
Moscow announced that people evacuated from China's Wuhan province would undergo a mandatory 2-week quarantine in Siberia's Tyumen region. None of the evacuees, however, were showing any illness symptoms at the time of arrival. A healthcare watchdog official earlier suggested the Siberian medical facility could be secured by fencing and patrolled by Russian National Guard. So far, only 2 coronavirus cases were reported in Russia. Both of the infected Chinese nationals are undergoing treatment. Russia's newly appointed Prime Minister, Mikhail Mishustin, said earlier this week that foreigners discovered to have the virus could be deported.
Lesotho's Prime Minister's wife is being formally charged with murdering his previous spouse. Mayasaya Tabani has handed herself in to authorities close to the border with South Africa. From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
This is a test of the emergency podcast system. Activated by contract termination. Rumors of our demise are greatly exaggerated. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington. She's blessed to be a Bible-reading, gun-toting, Air Force veteran, wife and mom, righteously American.
That's right. I'm righteously American, and I'm finally catching up a little bit after a whirlwind that it was me running all over the place yesterday. Yeah, so it was Tuesday, so we headed back out to the St. Louis County Council meeting, me and one of my road dogs. I don't say ride or dies because I don't understand where people are going and why someone has to die when they're riding out. Anyway, I had a fantastic evening with a friend of mine. We went and we met 2 other friends, and we were at the St. Louis County Council meeting. Now, one of them, she wrote in solely for the purpose of educating the St. Louis County Council about abortion and the pro-life movement. And another, she went in and she made public comment about the vagrants issue. And so I first have to just lift my hands up in praise and worship. God is good. He has moved the Democrats on the county council to table their motion to simply eliminate the vagrancy laws. They are now going to sit together with one of the Republicans who has originally presented some proposed legislation, and they're going to work hard to put together something that satisfies their desire not to criminalize people who are poor, yet still protects the rest of us. And so that deserves a little bit of applause. The applause goes for the fact that they heard from constituents and they listened. So now I want to get into a little bit of audio, and we're doing a really quick. We have a ton of stuff to get into, but I want to get first into a little bit of audio for the for what happened with the State of the Union last night. So let's listen to this wonderful tribute to Charles McGee.
Charles is one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen. After more than 130 combat missions in World War II, he came back home to a country still struggling for civil rights and went on to serve America in Korea and Vietnam. A few weeks ago, I signed a bill promoting Charles McGee to Brigadier General, and earlier today, I pinned the stars on his shoulders in the Oval Office. General McGee, our nation salutes you. Thank you, sir.
And so at that point, you see, if you're watching the show or watching the State of the Union, that the Democrats a lot of them are seated. They won't stand. And they won't honor this man who's black. One of the Tuskegee Airmen have a storied history in America. They were a black regiment of flyers that went out and just killed it. They were amazing. They had to go out and fight for their country, and they did an amazing job. And then they came back to segregation and racial animus, and they lived through that and survived and went on to make wonderful just families and lives for themselves. And so to have President Trump honor the last remaining one of them, it just was really special. And his grandson was there, and it was just the cutest thing. He's 100 years old, and he's standing there, and he's obviously just this really happy individual. And that's how they treated him. They didn't stand up for him. So then we have a little bit more, but I'm actually going to, because I see something happening here. I'm going to cut to a news break here. I know this is odd, but this is the show. This sometimes happens. When I got to a news break here, when we get back, we are going to be discussing the response. Democrats called into C-SPAN, and they had an amazing response. And so we're going to listen to some of that and then break down the State of the Union right after this.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. At least 23 people have died and more are trapped after an avalanche in eastern Turkey, where dozens of people were working after an earlier avalanche on Tuesday. Some people have become trapped in vehicles at the site, where about 300 rescue personnel were working. It's reported police officers, security guards, firefighters and civilians are among the dead. At least 5 people died in Tuesday's avalanche. US President Donald Trump's delivered a State of the Union address that was marked by moments of controversy. He used the annual speech to say there's been a great American comeback, but he refused to shake the hand of Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and she ripped up a copy of his speech behind him. US correspondent Simon Marks says the president was in ebullient form.
This was Donald Trump absolutely laying out his stall for re-election in November of 2020. And if you want to know why Donald Trump feels so confident about the re-election battle that he's about to engage in, you just had to listen to the cadences that he struck in that speech, particularly one right at the beginning. Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again. I mean, that was the tone of the entire speech, whether he was talking about foreign policy, winning, as he put it, the trade war with China. When Donald Trump walked into the chamber, there were absolutely no pleasantries whatsoever exchanged between him and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the woman, of course, who had led the impeachment inquiry and investigation against President Donald Trump.
The death toll in the coronavirus outbreak is now up to at least 490. China is stepping up its attempts to control its spread, with as many as 18 million people in parts of the country where they're being told to stay at home. Russia has set up a quarantine center near the Siberian town of Tyumen for at-risk evacuees arriving from China. Moscow's airlifted some 150 citizens by military planes from Wuhan region. Daria Bondarchuk reports from Moscow.
Moscow announced that people evacuated from China's Wuhan province would undergo a mandatory 2-week quarantine in Siberia's Tyumen region. None of the evacuees, however, were showing any illness symptoms at the time of arrival. A healthcare watchdog official earlier suggested the Siberian medical facility could be secured by fencing and patrolled by Russian National Guard. So far, only 2 coronavirus cases were reported in Russia. Both of the infected Chinese nationals are undergoing treatment. Russia's newly appointed Prime Minister, Mikhail Mishustin, said earlier this week that foreigners discovered to have the virus could be deported.
Lesotho's Prime Minister's wife is being formally charged with murdering his previous spouse. Mayasaya Tabani has handed herself in to authorities close to the border with South Africa. From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Welcome back to the program. Okay, so we were talking about the State of the Union, and I think one of the most fun things about last night was how the media reacted to what was a very positive speech. The parts of the speech where the president talked about his policies being better than the Democrats, that's to be expected. You wouldn't have the Republican president, head of the Republican Party, because he's the president, getting up and saying nice things about Democrats. Now, would you? Now, he really laid into them on immigration and some other things, but not by name specifically. He just said, look, these are things that are happening, like the rape of the 94-year-old grandmother by an illegal alien who, if he'd only been held and released to ICE instead of released back into the streets, he wouldn't have been able to rape her. That was an important thing to point out to Americans who don't hear these stories on their news. Local news doesn't report it. National news doesn't report it. Cable news doesn't report it. So why not have the president on the one time out of the year where all of America's looking and he has the opportunity to tell them something? Why wouldn't he tell them the truth about that? There were a lot of really high, beautiful moments. Of course, not just the Tuskegee Airmen, but the military family that was reunited after 4 deployments. A beautiful, beautiful thing to see. The highlighting of the little baby. Well, she's a little girl now, but when she was a baby, she was born premature. The youngest, fetal age-wise baby ever to be born in the United States and survive, and there she is thriving, was a beautiful story. There were a lot of things that the Democrats could have said, you know what? I'm going to be bipartisan here. These are Americans, and I like what I'm hearing. But they refused. Now, Kyrsten Sinema was a standout last night because not only did she not wear white, but she stood up at appropriate times. She actually acted as if she were an American. So able to see when someone has done something that is amazing. So it was beautiful in that aspect. The president, his approval rating has popped to 49%. He has bested Obama at the same time in Obama's presidency. And I think one of the highlights was when he gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Rush Limbaugh. It was just a beautiful evening. And the president has a lot of amazing accomplishments under his belt. I felt like it was the highlight of his presidency last night, that State of the Union. It was his most presidential. And if it felt a little bit like a victory lap, I feel like it was as well. It was a victory lap. It was the president coming in and listing off the things that he'd done that helped Americans and doing it with a bit of verve. He had a little bit of swagger to him, but it wasn't rally swagger. It's almost as if he'd done enough swaggering and enough having of fun to be able to go into this in the State of the Union even more presidential than he'd ever been before. So I loved it. I enjoyed listening to it. It was informative. It was fun because of the different Americans he highlighted, and because there was a lot of the information that I feel like most Americans don't know they got last night for the first time. And if they were watching and paying attention, it was to their benefit to learn those things because it's important who we vote for. We're going to be held accountable for that. So that brings us to the response. So C-SPAN has a Democrat phone line, they have a Republican phone line, and they have an independent phone line. And after major events like the State of the Union, they open up the phone lines and the C-SPAN hosts take calls from people, and they'll say it's Jenny calling in on the Democrat line. It's Stacy calling in on the Republican line. It's Jim calling in on the independent line. And so this was some interesting audio. They had a series of phone calls that were mashed together by a Twitter user. And they were different people calling in to respond to what they saw in the State of the Union. And This includes what they saw with Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech after it was over. I don't agree that she was ripping up an official document because she received a copy. The official State of the Union speech is probably stored, electronically, and maybe there's a paper archive someplace, but the one she had wasn't the only one. So I doubt if she'll be prosecuted for ripping it up. But it painted a picture of a certain attitude from her that I don't think Americans were expecting. Trump is the one who has the reputation for being this, cad and outside of protocol, et cetera. But it was her. She was the one who misbehaved. And some people are pointing to the fact that he started the snub off by not shaking her hand. But was it proper protocol to shake her hand? Did he shake her hand last year? I mean, before we start talking about what all he did that was wrong, first you show me where he's required to shake her hand. And if you say, well, it's just common courtesy if someone reaches out to shake your hand, if you're getting ready to give the speech of your lifetime and you hand your political opponent, someone who's just impeached you, the speech as a courtesy, which he is required to do, are you required to then stand around and make niceties and make everyone wait while you do the speech? It was a stunt on her part. And you know it because she looked over to the gallery where all of her women in white were, and she made a face and acted as if, like, what's wrong with him? You impeached him. That's what's wrong with him. It is incorrect for your enemy to expect that you're going to exchange common courtesies when you're on the field of battle. He's still fighting for acquittal. That happens today. As you can tell, it was a little annoying to me that she made such a big deal out of all this stuff. But don't take it from me. Let's listen to callers into the Democrat line on C-SPAN and hear what they had to say about what they saw last night in the State of the Union and the Democrats' response.
I've been a Democrat for 70-something years. And what I've seen tonight of the Democrat Party, I am changing my mind. I mean, I'll probably still be a Democrat. But as far as I'm electing for a goddamn Democrat, never again.
I am a Democrat as well, but no longer will I vote Democrat. I think it's outrageous that they sat there when all these good things are happening to our country and how much we love our country, and they looked like they hated our country. And Nancy Pelosi, the whole time she's sitting up there with a disgusting look on her face, it's outrageous. I will never vote Democrat again. And I'm sick of it, and my whole family feels the same way. My husband, my friends are sitting here, all former Democrats. We all voted for Hillary last time, and therefore never, ever will we ever vote Democrat again. You know, it's always portrayed that the Democrats don't love their country. Well, we love our country, and we want to see it succeed. But it appears to us that our Democratic Party has been stolen from us by a bunch of communists. And no longer will our family ever vote Democrat again.
I am literally disgusted with Pelosi and the Democrats' behavior, the way she teared up the speech behind him at the end. I was a registered Democrat. I've gone independent. I'm leaning GOP now.
With a simple rip of a paper, Nancy Pelosi has pretty much sealed the deal of a re-election of Donald Trump.
So that was quite a mashup. Unbelievable. I mean, that's a lot of people calling in and a wide range of the sounds of the people. Because remember, C-SPAN, that's all over the United States. You can listen to C-SPAN all over the world if you have the internet, but it's all over the United States. So instead of it just being people from the South or just being people from the North or, different syndicated radio and television and all of that, different cable news has different audiences and heavily coming from this part of the country or that. C-SPAN is really just a cross-section of Americans who listen to it, and they choose it because in their minds, it's just a neutral, it's a place where they can listen, where they have less of the opinion and commentary. It's not true. There is opinion and commentary over at C-SPAN. I've listened to it before, and I will be yelling at my phone because some liberal on there will be pontificating, and then the Republican counterpart doesn't say anything in response to it. It's almost like they're asleep at the wheel. So still, Americans view it as a much more neutral way of listening. They just want to hear what they want to hear without the commentary. So if it's live from Capitol Hill or like last night at the State of the Union, you get to hear it all the way through without commentary. And then at the end, you get to hear calls from Americans. And you heard that. That was more than 3 people. There's a lot of people calling in and expressing their shame and disgust and disdain for the way that Nancy Pelosi behaved and also really kind of expressing just what it's okay to be happy. It's okay to be happy for the accomplishments that President Trump outlined for Americans, because they are accomplishments for everyone. So, that being said, I think anytime the State of the Union is filled with so many great accomplishments, every American should be happy about it. Americans who aren't for that, then that seems like a personal problem, like a you problem. It also feels as if people are doing it out of spite. It's not out of a true, like the assessments that I've seen of the president's speech that say it was a violent speech, it was a mean-hearted speech. It wasn't. I didn't hear that at all. But if you have Trump derangement syndrome, you're probably going to think that it did, that it's a horrible, nasty, mean, awful speech. And so there it is. Now, there were some other interesting moments during the State of the Union last night. By the way, the president also didn't shake Vice President Pence's hand. There were plenty of people he walked by. He didn't shake their hands. There it is. And then there was the coverage afterwards. So Christy Clark over at MSNBC she's reporting on MSNBC's daytime lineup host Katie Tur being shocked when she met Iowans who supported President Trump. Tur was actually in Iowa looking to speak to farmers there. She was hoping that they would complain about the president and his trade war with China. And so here's how she leads into the question. She says, it's conventional Democratic knowledge that Trump's trade war with China, including the consequential tariffs, are harming farmers' bottom lines, particularly in the swing state of Iowa. But when she asked them about how they felt, they were like, no, we support President Trump. It's not hurting us at all. The long-term ramifications are not negative for us. And then there was a little bit of just kind of other things, like Reuters reporting on the World Trade Organization director Roberto Azevedo saying that he wasn't going to meet with President Trump during his current visit to Washington, but that U.S. officials actually have this sense of urgency about reforming the global trade body. And he says he's in constant contact with the U.S. Trade Representative's office and will return to Washington if a meeting with Trump or other officials was scheduled. But he said he wasn't going to meet with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer or President Trump during this visit to attend the conference. So that's his way of dancing around the fact that Lighthizer nor the president invited him for a meeting. They don't want to meet with him, so he's framing it as him being too busy to meet with them, but really he didn't get an invitation, because if he did, he would have come to the White House and met with them. Yeah, I think I'm reaching a level of just a little bit of, maybe it's tangential, it's like around my edges or something, exhaustion with the fact that we can't get Democrats to acknowledge anything good that the president has done. And it might be because they're just in that mode, because that's the way we were with President Obama. We never really talked about things that he did that were good. I actually did highlight those things. Sometimes I would get hate mail about it from us, from our side, saying don't say anything good about him. He's out to destroy the country. And he did work pretty hard at accomplishing his own agenda, which was destructive towards America. But he did have the things like the mentoring program that he started for Black youth, and he paired people in the Obama administration and professionals across the country with Black youth across the country to get them mentor opportunities to help them really just make it out of middle and high school and set their lives on a better trajectory. And so I highlighted that. And there were some other things that came about that were awesome. I mean, President Obama was the best gun salesman America has ever had. His efforts to control guns and his talking about it propelled us into an unparalleled 8 years of Americans going out and buying guns and stockpiling them and ammunition. And there were a few other things. So it's like a broken clock is right twice a day. He was like that. And there were maybe a couple of other times he was right as well. But I guess maybe that was just me. Regardless of whatever happened with President Obama, with President Trump being the current president and the options on the Democratic side being a man who is a homosexual and married to another man, a man who likes sniffing children and is incoherent much of the day and has to be led out of the caucus area by the hand by a young person, that's Biden, and then no names like Klobuchar and Yang. And I'm not saying that to be insulting. I'm saying most Americans don't know they're running or they're not aware of them. They're not polling in the top 5. You have Bernie Sanders, who's an avowed socialist, who loves communist things, and Elizabeth Warren, a woman who literally thought she was an American Indian until she had a DNA test, which she then said proved she was an American Indian, until American Indian said, you aren't one of us, and she finally had to admit that she wasn't one. Who she's also a socialist. That's on the left. So is there really a choice for Americans? I'm sure there are people out there who will vote for some of those people I just named off, but for most of us, there isn't. You've got President Trump doing his darndest to protect us and to discharge his duties as president, and I'm so happy he's doing it. And anything less than that in a president isn't worthy of your vote. Prove me wrong. Please. Show me where I'm wrong about that. I have a list of the president's accomplishments here. I'm not going to read them all to you. It's 4 separate documents. We don't need that. We don't need a new list. You can read it. I'll put links in the show notes for it if you want to check it out. We don't need that. What we need is 4 more years of Trump. I don't know. It sounds really awesome to me. 4 more years of Trump. Yeah. All right, that's the show for today. Big hellos to Robin, Tracy, Chi, Big Ron, and Smoke, who was in there for a hot second. Thanks for being in the chat. Thank you guys over on YouTube. Y'all have a great afternoon.